Hello there guys, Motorcast. Welcome to a new podcast today folks, and it is time for another Formula 1 discussion podcast with two of my Motorcast friends, if you'd like to call them that. But anyway, this is about Manor, who have unfortunately collapsed today after 7 years on the Formula 1 grid. They have outlived their other people who came into the sport like Caterham and HRT, but unfortunately they have now collapsed. Their parent company, Just Racing Services, were put into administration on the 6th of January, I believe, and 3 weeks later, after failing to find a buyer, the team closed just before the start of the 2017 season. So, the analysts today on today's show, I'm Toby, your host, and the analysts on today's show are Matt and Beni. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, guys.
Hello, yes. This is both of our first times on the show, so it's going to be very interesting how it all runs.
Well, there's quite a distinct difference. Obviously, Matt's English and Benny's Slovenian, so I think you'll be able to recognise who's who, don't you think, Benny?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, anyway, so let's get on to the serious talking about Manor now. So, Benny, what's your general reaction to today's news?
Well, obviously it's been quite a sad day for Formula 1. Another team closing because of financial problems. The last one that closed was Caterham back in 2014, and that was already quite bad because we lost a lot of cars, and we're down to only 20 cars for next season, which is quite a low number for Formula 1, considering in the 80s there was pre-qualifying to even try to qualify for the race, and there were like 30 cars there, and Formula 1 just doesn't seem to be financially doable now, and it should be fixed probably.
Matt, what do you think?
As much as I'm a fan of Manor, I think it wasn't really too big a shock. They've managed to come back from the dead, if you will, a couple of times previously, but you just get the sense that it was going to happen at some point, and it was just about trying to prolong the team for as long as they could, really. Still, obviously, a huge shame, obviously, that we're going back to 20 cars next year, but at the end of the day, money, as Benny said, is just the big issue for so many teams.
Don't you think it's really bad, though, that the three teams that came in 2010, and Bernie, I think, said that, fees would be lower and all these teams would survive. Obviously, Toyota went in 2009 and pretty much Brawn, okay, the Mercedes now. But, three teams that came in 2010, we'll talk about who we blame a bit later on. But, Benny, don't you think it's just shocking that three teams that came in 2010, Bernie said that the fees would lower, they haven't lowered, and all those teams have gone now? It just seems a bit pointless, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did quite, and at that time they were promising a budget cap, but that never came because the big teams refused, so yeah, that's just a shame.
And obviously Matt's only one of the teams, which is Manor, obviously scored points to Jules Bianchi. What do you actually think that? What do you think the sport? What avenue do you think the sport's going down now? Do you think there'll be more teams in the future, or do you think it will stay as it is for the next few years anyway?
It's reaching the point now with Formula 1 where unless you go down the Haas route of putting a lot of money and a lot of development into it previously and having teams like Ferrari willing to supply you with parts for the car, it reaches the point now where it's just going to be the few teams that, like, for example, Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull to a certain extent, that are going to be the only teams we're going to see on the grid. And it's just going to make those teams pull away even further from anyone that even tries to get into the sport from now on.
It's definitely frustrating. I mean, Haas obviously backed a lot by Ferrari, and that certainly helped their 2016 development. But it's really sad, really, with those three teams that came in 2010. They didn't make any progression, and all the money that they invest into F1, wouldn't you agree, Benny? It was just dead money, isn't it? Because it didn't really get them anywhere, apart from obviously the points that Bianchi scored. And, none of the drivers that actually drove for the teams. Okay, you've got Verline and Ocon this season, but prior to that, none of the drivers really I can think of progressed up the grid, apart from obviously Daniel Ricciardo in 2011 at HRT.
Yeah, well, as you said, it is quite dead money, and in the end, it's just a shame, and what can I say, just Formula 1 these days just isn't financially viable unless you've got tons of sponsors. And to get the sponsors, you've got to be successful, and if you're not successful, you're not gonna get the sponsors, and it's just a never-ending circle that just leads to the big teams just getting bigger and the small teams just disappearing.
Well, it's certainly a shame. I think everyone thinks it's a shame, and we all feel sorry for the smaller teams, and all the British people, even the Slovenians, of course, obviously like the underdog. But unfortunately, Manor have ceased today. So let's reflect on Manor's 7-year history in Formula One, obviously coming to F1 as Virgin, backed by Richard Branson, then getting Russian backing as Marussia, then making the move to Manor Racing or Manor Motorsport in 2016 for that 1 year with Pascal Wehrlein, Rio Haryanto, and later in the season Esteban Ocon. So in that 7-year period, Matt, what would you say the best moment is?
I think everyone knows exactly what the best moment will always be, and it's what Manor will probably be remembered for. It has to be Jules Bianchi at Monaco 2014, where he managed to get that car into 9th place by the end. He was actually running in 8th place, wasn't he, with a 5-second penalty towards the end of the race. But I think for everyone, in 20 years down the line, when someone says to you, do you remember Manor F1, everyone will think of just that moment where he came across the line in P9 and just how much it meant towards the team.
Yeah, it was certainly really iconic. And would you say there's another moment, Benny, that might be iconic or go down as a legacy, or do you think it's just that moment, really?
Well, that moment's obviously gonna be most remembered because it was the first points for one of the teams that entered in 2010, and it because Jules Bianchi sadly passed away after the crash. But I think a lot of people will forget that Wehrlein scored points this year in Austria with a phenomenal drive, and this year it was obviously again one of the worst cars on the grid. I think it was only better than the Sauber, depending on the race, but yeah, probably Monaco 2014 is gonna be as their defining moment because at that time the car really was the worst on the grid, and Jules Bianchi just did the magic and got points.
Yeah, it was certainly a fantastic drive, and he's definitely missed on the grid, and it was just a horrible crash that was. But obviously, let's look forward to the future now. The 2017 grid, obviously, Wehrlein and Ocon jumped shop from Manor, obviously, to Sauber and Force India, respectively. Matt, obviously, this means that Felipe Nasr and both Nasr and Gutierrez don't get a seat for next season. It's definitely a bit ironic with Nasr getting the points with Sauber that took Manor off the grid, in effect. But do you think that Nasr or Gutierrez are maybe missed, or do you think they are just people that have been given the chance and haven't really took it?
See, I honestly don't believe that Manor should, if they were on the grid in 2017, I don't honestly believe they should have hired either Nasr or Gutierrez, because I don't think personally that Nasr or Gutierrez really deserves a place in Formula 1. Obviously, they're both paid drivers as well. And with the performances, apart from obviously Nasr at Brazil, where he basically just didn't pit, and that's how he ended up in the position he was, sort of 2/3 of the way through the race. Gutierrez not being able to, he didn't score a point in the Haas overall in the season, did he? In the very end. And I think in comparison to Romain Grosjean, although we got lucky with the points he did score, for Gutierrez not to get anything out of that Haas when it comes to points, I don't think either of them really deserve to see. I think Manor in 2017, obviously if they were on the grid, should have got 2 new drivers and 2 new young talents.
Benny, do you think, certainly Gutierrez, I don't know about Nasr underperforming, the car wasn't exactly brilliant, but do you think Gutierrez's criticism is maybe a bit harsh, considering Grosjean may have had 2 really good races at the start of the year, and obviously he didn't score many points after that, and obviously the points difference, well, Gutierrez got none, but the points difference may look bigger than it seems?
Well, yeah, I do agree with that, because Gutierrez did have some good races, and all of the races that he had good races, he finished 11th, I think. And he did a decent job, sometimes even outperforming Grosjean, but in most of the time he just wasn't that good as Grosjean. And I think that it was deservedly that he lost his seat. I think this year he was only there for the money and because he had experience from 2013 and 2014. And yeah, that's it for Gutierrez. And for Nasr, I think that in 2015, when he came in, he showed quite a lot of promise, and he was quite impressive at the start of the season, especially. But this season, when the car just wasn't up to it, I think he lost a bit of the motivation, and he didn't just develop further as a driver. And in the meantime, Ericsson he was just doing better and better, and it was a shame that Ericsson didn't score points. But yeah, Nasr was a bit lucky with Brazil.
So obviously with the disappearance of Manor off the grid, I know I did was a bit extreme in the other podcast we did about Formula 1 and Bottas going to Mercedes, saying that Sauber could potentially be this year the 2015 Manor. I realise that's a little bit strong. But Benny, again, do you think that Sauber will have no competition at the back, or do you think they'll actually be decent? Because I don't think they will, because obviously they've got that 2016 engine, the Ferrari engine. I think everyone else would have kind of developed in front of them, don't you think?
Well, I think at the start of the season it's mainly gonna be how good they interpreted the regulations, because let's remember back to 2009, the last time we had such a big regulation change. Brown came out of nowhere and just were at the start of the season the fastest, but due to the lack of funding, they just lost a lot of time. They just lost pace, and they just at the end of the season, Red Bull outdeveloped them, and even a few other teams came closer. But who knows how it's gonna end? If they seem to get the regulations right, they're gonna be competitive at the start of the season. But I think as the season is gonna go on, they're just gonna be slower and slower. And at the start of the season, I think the engine is not gonna be such a big problem yet. Let's see, because if you remember this season, Toro Rosso were still using the 2015 engines, which towards the end of the season especially were showing signs of being underpowered. But at the start of the season they were still halfway decent.
Matt, do you think kind of Sauber will reap what they sow in the end with the 2016 engine, obviously with the 2016 engine and not being able to compete with anybody else? Or do you think that they'll get the regulations right and maybe be slightly competitive?
I don't have much optimism for them. I think they will, as you said, slip into the 2015 Manor seat, if you will. Yeah, I just think, although the engine development between this year and next year probably won't be that big, I think they don't have a huge amount of money as a team anyway, and I think teams like Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, obviously, although they do hugely benefit and make big gains every time a new rule change comes in, I think Sauber will really struggle when it comes to funding to be able to build a car and develop a car that will be good enough to really compete. I don't think we'll see Sauber score points in 2017, in my personal opinion.
So we go back to the Manor reaction, and obviously Manor seizing their interaction with the sport. Who do we blame, Benny? Do we blame Bernie? Do we blame Liberty Media? The people who have just come in and maybe, Chase Carey or Ross Brawn have said, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to put some money in to save this team. Or do you think it's FOM? Or do you think it's somebody else? Do you think it's somebody that's maybe behind the scenes that we don't know about that's kind of led to this happening?
Well, this is obviously quite a hard thing to pinpoint, because obviously how the teams get the money is dependent on how many points they score and on their constructors position. But I don't think Bernie is entirely to blame, because he only has a certain amount of money to give out. I think there's also Ferrari and other teams that receive a bonus just for being there, because if you remember, Ferrari get about 100 million just for being there, which is more than I think the bottom three teams combined. And they also, because they do good, they also get more money from that. And even if Mercedes were totally dominant, Ferrari still got more money because of their bonuses. So I think Ferrari is partially to blame, and partially also the split of the money.
Matt, do you think we'll ever get fair pricing and fair price money in Formula 1, or do you think it's just too unrealistic to get to that goal?
It's too unrealistic, really, because all the big teams will have to do to get this fairness is by throwing away money that they simply refuse to throw away. Because at the end of the day, for every team on the grid, Formula 1 usually it isn't a profitable exercise for teams. It's about trying to get their name out there and things. And especially for teams like Ferrari, it's about having the reputation that they have in the sport, and for them, if they're not getting these bonuses, they'd quite happily move on to other sports, you would imagine. So I think we're either going to see the funding be shared equally, and we're going to have a lot more Manor and Sauber style teams, with a lot smaller businesses as such. But I think we're just not going to see that point where we're going to see it be completely fair and everyone be happy with what's happening.
Yeah, well, it's obviously, just to wrap things up, it's really a real shame, I think, from all of us that Manor's left the grid. I don't think it's dead money completely. We've had a few highlights from Manor with Jules Bianchi, we've had Pascal Wehrlein, we've had a few good drivers come through, but over 7 years, and there's been a lot of money wasted. Combine that with HRT, combine that with Caterham, and from the start of 2010 to now, the 3 teams have gone, and I can't quite comprehend that. I mean, continuity, no, let's just not have continuity whatsoever in Formula 1. But, that really wraps it up for today's podcast, unless you guys have got anything else to say. But we're really gutted about Manor leaving the grid. I think it was probably inevitable, like Matt said, after they went into administration, the leading company. Real shame about Manor going into administration, as we said. But I think that's all for today's podcast, unless you guys have got anything else to say.
No, I
hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed that podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Follow us all on Twitter for all brilliant views, as Josh said in the last video, and awful podcasts as always. And we will see you in the next podcast. So goodbye.